everyone. How are you doing? Welcome to the fourth in our series of Alpine Stories. We're super excited to have Iona here tonight talking about her ski mountaineering. And if you've missed them, you've missed three high quality talks. We've had Tamsin Gay talking about her expeditions in Greenland. Fantastic to hear about her climbing an unclimbed peak with 2 TV hunks and a TV film crew for the BBC. We also had Lou last week talking about the Grand Course and her experience leading up to becoming an aspirant guide. And also we had Sylvia from the Dolomites come and talk to us about her Patagonian adventures. So all of those talks are available on the website now. So if you missed them, you can catch up at your leisure. And just before we start, I'm here to just give you a little bit of background about who we are, and then we'll get started. So Women's Alpine Adventure Club, we are a community dedicated to helping women achieve their alpine dreams. And we do that by getting together and sharing skills and having workshops in the mountains around rock climbing, ice climbing, ski touring, navigation, alpinism, all the skills you might need to move in the alpine terrain. And we also have a website that we have our favorite routes on. We have obviously all the talks like this. We also have skills videos like crevasse rescue, etc. So do use that as a valuable resource. So just before I kind of go on to introduce Jenny and Iona, just a little bit about housekeeping around this call. So you may have noticed we've muted all your mics and the same for your video. And we'd ask that you do that throughout the talk, just so that it's not distracting for Iona as she speaks. We will have Q&A time at the end and you'll be able to submit your questions. Jenny will walk you through how you can raise your hand digitally so that you can get your question answered at the end. But also you can write them in the chat box, and hopefully loads of you guys have already been writing in the chat box to tell us where you're from. Please keep doing that. It's really nice to, if we can't see your faces, at least know where you're from. And then, yeah, in the Q&A, just wait to be called upon until you ask your question, and it's up to you. You can put your mic on and your video on and actually, have a chat with us and share a question in person. Or if you're feeling a little bit shy, then that's no problem at all. We're happy to ask the question for you. All the talks are being recorded, and we're also live on Facebook, just so that we can make this publicly available, the talks. So just so that you're aware of that before you speak. And that's it really from me from housekeeping. I don't think I've forgotten anything, but I'm sure Jenny will remind me if I have. And then I'm going to hand over to Jenny, and you're going to introduce Iona. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Louise. Hi, everyone. Just to do a brief introduction for Iona. We're thrilled to have Iona to join us on our series of Alpine Stories. So Iona is a self-confessed ski mountaineering obsessive. She always is talking about ski mountaineering, pulking, ultralight kit, all that kind of stuff. So she's here to tell us a little bit about her journeys in the mountains, how she got into ski touring, ski mountaineering, and then tell us about a couple of her big trips and some tips how to do it. Iona is a mountaineering climbing instructor and an international mountain leader, and she's based in North Wales during the summer, working at Plaza Brenin, the National Mountain Centre. In the winter, she disappears off somewhere snowy, wherever that may be, to have some adventures and also work towards her further qualifications. So Iona, do you want to turn on your video and mic? And yeah, over to you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Hi, thank you so much for introducing me, Jenny, and I'm thrilled to be here to chat about my adventures with all of you lot as well. So I've just got a little technical thing as I get control of the screen. And let's have a look. Ah, awesome. Okay. So this evening, I'm going to talk to you all a little bit about my journey into the mountains, how I got into this sort of sport of ski mountaineering, if you like, this hobby, and also some of the trips I've been on. So I'm going to talk mostly about a ski trip to Mount Logan in Canada, and then 2 more recent trips to Scandinavia as well. And then there'll be a very short little video at the end, so you can sort of see it in real life, as it were. And then that's it. Then it'll be time for questions and answers. So during the summer months, as Jenny said, I work mostly in Snowdonia, predominantly for Plaza Brennan, but also for a few other people as well. And I just take people into the mountains, teach them things, have a really good time. This is a picture of me with some 2 clients on their first ever multi-pitch rock climbing route on Italy slabs last summer. And then during the winter time, I used to spend a lot of time in the Alps. I spend less so nowadays, but one of the things I loved about living in the Alps was teaching skiing, because that's what I did as a profession. But of course, living and being based in Verbier means that you've got this picture here, about an hour from the top of the highest ski lift. And that's amazing, because it means on all your days off, you can just get out and explore and go ski touring and have all sorts of adventures right out the front door. More recently though, this has been my view in the winter. So I've spent a lot more time in Scotland and in the UK as I've worked towards my winter mountain leader qualification and done a bit of suffering and got a bit better at navigating in some whiteouts. But really, in the winter, what I love are my holidays. And some will see this sort of picture and go, that's not a holiday, because I've got a massive rucksack on and I'm towing a Pulk, which is essentially like a toy sledge, if you like. It's like a really advanced sledge, and we connect it to ourselves using plastic plumbing pipe because it doesn't get brittle in the cold. It's quite flexible, and it's a lot easier and lighter than sort of using metal rods like some people use when they carry Pulks in the mountains. Okay, so why do I do it? Well, the reason why I like taking a massive rucksack into the middle of nowhere is essentially to go skiing where I'm not going to see anybody else or very few people, you know, so we can have all the self-resilience and sort of reliance as a team, and we can decide where we're going to go and what we're going to ski. We can get in the first tracks and the powder, and we can have the closest thing to a true adventure you can have at the moment, I think, in that sort of snowy environment. And I just love that. I love that feeling of having everything you need to survive for, it might be for a week, it might be for 4 weeks. It's just amazing. It's so cool. So where did it begin? Well, I was lucky enough to have parents who, I think they're actually watching this evening, who sort of took me, this is me and my sister in the Alps, and they took us on lots of trekking holidays as kids. And I think for me, that really opened my eyes up to the mountains, and I knew that I really enjoyed being in them. But I also used to see people tied together with ropes on the glacier, on the top lift in the ski resorts. And I'd sort of think like, oh, I really want to do that. And I would go to lectures at the Royal Geographical Society in London because my dad was a member. And I'd always sit there and be like, whoa, all these mountaineers, when they talked about their stories of first ascents and things. And I just thought, yeah, I really want to do that. And I can remember sticking my hand up and being like, how do I become a mountaineer? And the guy who was talking at the time just sort of said, well, you just have to go climbing a bit. And I was like, right, okay, well, I guess I'm going to have to find someone that goes climbing a bit because I don't know anyone that climbs a bit. But it sowed the seeds for things to come. So it wasn't until I took a gap year after school that I first started getting my first few paychecks in, and was really fortunate to live at home rent-free, which then meant that I could buy things like my first ever ice axe, which I still use today, quite a few years later. I love it. And then, of course, you know, where do you go to learn to be a mountaineer? Well, I thought, well, you go to Nepal, don't you? Like, that's where all the mountaineering is. So I went to Nepal to join the Nepal Mountaineering Association basic mountain trekking guide course, which was great. I learned so much. It was 45 days long and just incredible. So before I carry on, I thought maybe I should just talk a bit about what ski touring is. And it'd be really cool to know if you put in the chat who ski tours, who skis, so I have a bit of an idea maybe towards the end of the chat, like who actually is a skier already and who has got no idea what this sport is at all, or this hobby, if you want to call it that. So for me, ski touring is like a combination of every single mountain sport I can think of. And you'll see in this picture here, I've got lots of different food types at the bottom, and that's because we're going to be camping. So you need to be able to camp in the mountains. I've got a harness at the top left and some climbing gear and an ice axe. So you need to have some winter and some summer sort of technical mountaineering skills. Lots of warm clothes. You can see my bright yellow down jacket in the top right hand corner. So you need to learn to be able to look after yourself in the mountains, and you need to be able to navigate. And of course you get to go skiing as well, which is just great. So there's not many sports that include so many different elements all in one day. And I think that's one of the reasons why it really appeals to me. So the next question people ask me is like, well, how do you get up the hill? And I always find this really funny, because I think they sort of imagine it's a bit like this picture here. And they sort of imagine you carrying your skis up the hill like this. But it's not quite like that. I love their fashion sense in this picture. That's why I chose it, really. So you have really comfortable boots. So the boots are much lighter and much more flexible than a normal like downhill ski boot. And that means that it's much easier for you to walk around in. You've got bindings, which mean that you can free your heel for the way up the hill. So you might have seen people cross-country skiing and sort of pushing their skis along in front of them. So you do that on the way up the hill, but then for the way down the hill, you get to clip your heels into the bindings as well. And then you're suddenly a bit more like an Alpine skier, and you can ski as you would normally. And then underneath your skis, you put what we call a skin underneath the ski. So it's like, well, it's like almost like a piece of fur. And in some parts of the world, they still use actual animal fur as the skin underneath the ski. But we tend to use more of a synthetic style sort of mohair mix on most of our skins nowadays. And as you glide up the hill, it sort of glides with you. But then to stop you sliding back down again, because that wouldn't be very good, sort of all the fur underneath the skin grabs on the snow. So you make forwards progress. And you can see in that top right hand picture, that's the skin just being peeled off the ski. So that was great. And I'd done a bit of rock climbing and a bit of mountaineering, and I'd done a bit of ski touring, but I still didn't know anyone that could ski tour. And all my climbing friends, like none of them were very good skiers. They might just be able to survive down the mountain, but I certainly wasn't going to go off piste with them in the middle of nowhere. And then all of my skiing friends and a lot of my skiing colleagues just thought it was mad. And they just thought, like, why on earth would you want to do that? Like, why would you possibly want to do that when you can just take a lift or a helicopter or something else? And it wasn't until someone said to me, well, join the Eagle Ski Club, that I suddenly thought, oh, right, okay. And before I know it, I became a member and started going on trips. Now, one of the first ever trips I went on was to Mongolia. And it was amazing. And I guess what I find funny about this is that it was a bit of chance, really, a bit of luck, being in the right place at the right time to go on this trip. And I can remember writing an email to Dave, who was leading the trip, and being like, hi, Dave, I'm really keen. I've done loads of camping. I'm a really keen skier. I've just passed my ski instructor qualifications and I really want to come on your trip. Can I please come on your trip? And it wasn't until years later, he actually admitted to me that he was like, yeah, and I got this email from this 21-year-old lady, and I sort of thought, I'm not really sure, she's never been on a ski expedition like this before. Does she really want to spend a month with 5 grumpy old men in a tent, sort of thing? But he took a gamble and it paid off, and I was really grateful, and I learned a huge amount, and it was just incredible. And it's not every day you get to see camels carry your skis into the mountains. So that bottom right hand picture, we used camels to get from the end of where the vehicle could drop us off to the start of the glacier. So that was pretty cool in itself. And then after that trip, pretty much actually about 2 days after it finished, I moved to Snowdonia to start a job as a centre assistant, like a trainee at Plaza Brennan. And I realised that I wanted to learn a lot more about the mountains and get a bit more knowledge and a bit more skills. So sort of went out in the winter and had lots of fun with friends. And this is us, I think we were on Crib Lem, which is a classic grade 1 or 2 winter route in Wales on the left-hand side, and also started doing a lot more rock climbing. You can just about see my feet on the slate holds in the picture on the right-hand side. And although I had the mountaineering rope work skills, I still wasn't really that good at climbing. I still didn't really know that much about climbing. I learned everything backwards. So I learned to ski and mountaineer before I learned to rock climb, whereas traditionally most people do it in the other way. And I still wasn't a climbing instructor at this stage. So I was slowly working towards qualifications in the outdoors too. The following year, Dave had me back on another expedition, thank you. And this time we went to the Bugaboos. We never actually made it to Rogers Pass because we got stuck in our tents for 4 nights because it just kept snowing and snowing and snowing. But we did manage to traverse the entire of the Bugaboos, and that was really cool. It was a very different journey in that we were continually traveling from place to place along the way. And you can see there that I'm towing a little haul bag behind me. So we towed haul bags in Mongolia, but only for a couple of days. And the Bugaboos was my first experience of towing something in addition to carrying my rucksack every single day. Anyway, fortunately, at the end of the trip, we managed to get a helicopter out after those 4 nights in the tent because it had snowed so much. We couldn't go back, we couldn't go forward, we couldn't go out. We would have been totally stuck. And then subsequently, I took really every single chance and opportunity I had to get better at skiing. So lots of steep skiing, probably much to my mother's horror on the left-hand side there, because that's where they hold the Free Ride World Tour Extreme like final on that mountain. And it's great to ski, it's amazing, you just can't fall. And skiing in Snowdonia on the right-hand side, so that was really early before work one day. And I knew the snow was going to melt during the day. And I just thought, do you know what? It's not every chance, you know, every time you get to ski in Snowdonia is special, and it doesn't happen every year. So I got up really early and went into the top of the Canada and skied down, and then went for a day of work afterwards, which was just so cool. I sat smugly in the staff room for the whole morning, like, I've just been skiing. But I guess the other thing for skiing things like this is quite often when you go ski touring and mountaineering, the snow isn't really like on the piste, and you get really bad snow. You do get really good powder, but you also get all of the crap snow that no one wants to ski. So just being better at skiing lots of different types of snow in lots of different places meant that maybe I could enjoy my holidays a little bit more. And then a few years ago, I was sat around a table in the Lake District, and it was at one of the leaders' meetings for the Eagles. And everyone was going around the table and sort of saying what trips they were hoping to lead over the next year or two. And Phil, who I didn't really know very well at the time, said, well, I'd like to lead a trip to the highest mountain in Canada. It's notorious for bad weather, arduous pack hauling. There probably won't be much skiing. And I was like, sign me up. That sounds amazing. Like, what more would you want from your holiday? And so began about nearly 2 years of packing and faffing and organising our kit and equipment and preparing for the trip. And it's amazing how at the start of every single trip, you just seem to spend so long deciding what kit you're going to take and how much food to take. So you can see all those little plastic bags on the top. Each one of those was 1 day of food for one person. It was my food. And normally I take 500 grams of food per day on a trip like this. But we were really worried about how cold it was going to be. So we decided, well, maybe we should err on the side of caution and take 600 grams. That was a mistake, because about 3 days later, I felt really sick from having eaten far too much food, and I had far too much stuff to carry. So I ended up caching it on the glacier, only to pick it up on the way back home. So I'm definitely not ever going for 600 grams of food again. But lots of other kit choices, like, do you take really fat skis so it's really easy to ski when you're carrying a heavy rucksack, or do you take really skinny skis because it's going to be much lighter, much easier to carry up the mountain? Anyway, by the time that was all done, there's a team of 6 of us in the bottom right-hand corner with all of our food and equipment. And I weighed all my equipment, because you have to weigh yourself and your equipment before you're allowed on the aeroplane, so that the pilot knows that he's going to be able to fly and land, and that's quite important. And so I realised I had 53 kilograms of personal kit and food. So that was excluding my share of fuel, that was probably another couple of kilos, and my share of the tent and some other group equipment. And that's nearly as much as I weigh. So it was quite a lot of stuff. Anyway, some of you probably were wondering where Mount Logan is, and the highest mountain in Canada. And you're not alone. A lot of Canadians have got no idea that that is the name of their highest mountain. And this caused much hilarity as we flew over. We flew all the way across the country on different internal flights. And one of my teammates would sort of quiz the air hostesses, and this was quite amusing, because he would sort of go, you know, do you know what your highest mountain is? We're here to ski it. And they'd be like, oh, is that like Mount Kilimanjaro? Sorry, I can't do the Canadian accent. And we'd be like, no, I think you're in the wrong continent. And they'd be like, oh, maybe Kathmandu. And we're like, yeah, no, that's not actually a mountain. And then they'd be like, oh, it must be Denali. And we're like, no, that's next door, not in Canada. Anyway, so we had to tell them what it was and where it was. But there's a reason why not many people go there and why not many people have heard of it. So you can't see Mount Logan from a road. You actually have to fly in to be able to see it. You can go on a scenic tour in the summer if you fancy not skiing it. And it's sort of got a reputation for bad weather, and you can see how close it is to the sea, that all of the sort of wind is going to be coming straight off the sea, picking up all of the extra precipitation and just dumping it down on the first range of mountains that stop it. So that's why Denali, which is a little bit further west, and Mount Logan are notorious for really bad weather. And that whole area just gets so much snow and bad winds. And you can also see all those long white strips on the Google terrain photo there. They're really, really big glaciers. So it's got some of the biggest glaciers and ice fields outside of the Arctic and Antarctic regions. So this is a picture taken from the flight in, and it was at this moment that the scale of the mountain really started to sink in. So if you look closely, just towards the bottom left-hand side of the picture, you can see a tiny little shadow of a tent. And then right in the middle of the picture, there are two little dots, and they're two people. And for those of us in the team that had been to some pretty big mountains, like in the Himalayas and places, even for them, it was a scale unlike anything else that a lot of us had been to. And to give you an idea of that, a lot of the glaciers in the Alps might be a couple of kilometers long, but here they're a couple of kilometers wide and really, really, really long. So it was just huge. We would call it the Logan effect, how big the terrain was. But winter camping, like, it's not that bad, really, you know, unless you're in a blizzard. Having a base camp, this was a different trip because we sort of just had one mountain. It was like all our eggs in one basket rather than doing a journey. But it did mean that you could stash loads of really good food at base camp and eat really luxuriously. So we had Parmesan, we brought in hot sauce, we brought in eggs and Frankfurters and bread and everything. And it was really quite nice. And of course, when you're camping in the snow, you can dig yourself a table and some chairs to sit on, and you can make it really quite luxurious. In fact, our igloo loo was so successful that it was there 3 weeks after we returned from the summit of the mountain. So, you know, it goes to show that, yeah, snow camping's not that bad, really. Something that's quite interesting about Mount Logan is it's not a very technical mountain in terms of difficulty. So it's actually really quite easy, provided you can ski in control to avoid the crevasses and other people and things like that. It's not really technically that difficult, but psychologically, it's really difficult. So there's a col on the peak that you have to go over. And once you go over that col, there's not really any turning back. If the weather comes in, you can get stuck on the plateau. And the only way out of there is essentially 2 kilometers of steep serac glaciated terrain, which is like a no, you just wouldn't go there. So lots of people do have all sorts of epics by going over the col and not being able to return easily. And of course, it's a blooming long way. So on the bottom picture, that little tent that's just appeared, that was where we flew into. And where we are here in the picture is about 1, 2, 3 days of walking. So it's a really, really long way. And it's pretty high, you know, it's just under 6,000 meters, 5,959 meters. So you've got to acclimatize as well. And one of the best things about doing a mountain and a big mountain is that you can acclimatize relatively easy on this one, in that you carry all of your stuff up, or a lot of your stuff up, to the next camp, the one that you haven't reached yet, and then you ski back down. And then the following day, you take everything else up with you, and then you camp at that camp. And then you do the whole thing again and the whole thing again until you've made it to the summit. So that helps you acclimatize quite a lot. But it does also mean you get to ski the whole mountain twice. So that's quite good as well. But yeah, it's a really long way and quite psychologically committing. We did get in some really good skiing. In the background above those peaks, that's the Pacific Ocean. So that was really special to suddenly feel like we were gaining elevation on the mountain. This is above the icefall, so we're probably nearly 2/3 of the way up the mountain at this stage. And it was just amazing. I still couldn't get over the views around us. We did get some bad weather as well. Not bad enough to need to take shifts the whole night to dig out the tents. So we just had to do a bit of digging in the day. It wasn't too bad if you sort of read any horror stories in any mountaineering books. And this was, in a way, I don't like to say this, in a way it was like a bit disappointing, sort of, because you kind of go to a mountain like this to see if you're tough enough and to see if you're hard enough to survive, you know, the terrors that might await, even though you wouldn't wish it on anyone. And actually secretly, you really don't want, you know, several 100-mile-an-hour winds and blizzards and being stuck in your tent for days on end. But there's like a small part of you that sort of does a little bit. So I'm glad it didn't happen, but yeah, we'll see. And then at some stage, particularly if you're on a long trip, I find that you tend to get this little thing called food stress. Well, I call it food stress. And that's like, you know, I'm sure a lot of you might have been in a situation where you're out, it could even just be on a day-long walk, where you're sort of counting the M&Ms and you're going like, 1 for you, 1 for you, 1 for you, 1 for me, 2 for you. And like, if anyone's got 3 and you've only got 2, oh my goodness. I mean, that is just not on. But it's even worse when you're stuck on a big mountain in a tent with the same people all day. And so we used to do things like play top trumps on the back of our food packets and be like, I bet I've got more grams of protein in my food packet than you do. And they'd be like, well, I think I have more grams of fat than you do. And that would sort of while away the hours and take our mind off other foods and our fried eggs down at base camp. And we were really lucky enough, well, unlucky for the Canadian team that left it there for us, but we were lucky enough to be given the GPS coordinates for a stash of foods that they had left up the mountain. And because of altitude problems, they weren't able to complete their ascent, but they said, well, you know, you can dig up our food and eat it if you like. And inside was a cheese board of cheese. It was just incredible. So that bottom left-hand picture is all of the cheese we dug up. And I think we decimated it in like 2 days, but it was delicious and sort of took my mind off food stress for a bit. And then we finally made a bid for the summit. We had just enough weather to be able to get to the summit and get back before this horrific storm was due to arrive. Once we'd gone over the col onto the plateau before summit, this is the morning of summit, we had our first sunrise, which is really special in the Arctic, when you're in the Arctic regions in spring, because you're so far north, you just never really see the sun unless you're up really early. So this is at 4 in the morning. So it was, yeah, felt really special to be up ready for the summit and see the sun coming up too. And then this is us on the summit. I'm the one taking the photo. And you could see, yeah, the weather was already coming in. And that was really strange because we knew we were on the summit and you could sort of feel the steepness of the terrain going down from you. So even though you couldn't see it all, it felt really eerie and really like you could imagine these knife-edge ridges just sort of like descending away from you. And it was, yeah, quite amazing. And then, of course, the long way home. And by this stage, we were pretty knackered. And I definitely didn't eat enough on summit day. And, you know, I can remember wandering along and counting my paces and being like, okay, I'll count to 50 paces, and then I'll count another 50. And then it got to the end of that, and I was like, right, I'm down to 20 now. I'll just count 20. And then I couldn't count in terms of 20 paces. And I was like, I'll just count every 10, you know, just like totally knackered. And you can see none of us look too invigorated in any of those photos. However, we still had some good views and it was just incredible to be in that scenery. I've never experienced scenery quite like it on my skis before. And despite the fact we were feeling tired, it was really enjoyable at the same time. So the next trip I'm going to talk about is one that I did a couple of years ago to Sweden. And this was a bit of a different trip in that we had a start point. So that's Vietas, which is that bottom star on the picture on the right hand side, and we had an endpoint which was Abisko in the north, that top star on the picture on the right hand side. And those two stars are the ones at the top of the map on the left, because Sweden's quite a big country and lots of places, and you can just about see that there are some mountains from the texture of that map there. And the reason why I say this was a different trip is because we only had 2 weeks to get from the start to the end, and we didn't really make a plan about how we were going to get between the two. The plan was, so we're just going to go from one to the other, and we'll just pick a route along the way. And we had a few different ideas about where we might go and different peaks we might climb, but we didn't really make a formal plan. And I can remember a few weeks before we left, my maps had arrived in the post. And I can remember writing an email to David, who was leading the trip, and being like, David, where are we actually going? Have I sort of like missed a whole chain of communication here? Because I'm not really a very organised individual. And I thought that maybe I just missed the entire plan completely. But no, I was relieved to hear that actually that was the plan, that we were just going to go from one place to the other and there was no plan in between. So our access and egress and sort of escape route along the route was the Kungsleden, which some of you might have heard of. It's quite a popular summer walking route. And I didn't realise that they actually waymark the entire route with these crosses the whole way along in winter as well. And quite a few people cross-country ski it in the winter. So we did come across a few cross-country skiers on this route. And it made for a really nice way into the mountains. And you can just, this was our first view of the first mountains in Sweden. So this is like a typical day on our holiday, if you like, having our lunch break. And normally what we would do is we would pack up camp, move it down to the next door valley, and then we would see a peak that took our fancy, climb it, have a look across and sort of go, oh, should we do that one tomorrow? And then we'd ski back down, go to camp, you know, have a nice dinner, and then we'd do the same the next day. And it was just amazing. And we skied a peak almost every single day we were there for the 14 days. In total, I worked out we travelled 200 kilometres and averaged about 1,000 metres of ascent a day. So that was quite a lot for carrying a Pulk and a big rucksack as well. And it was just amazing. I mean, we were so lucky with the weather and the snow conditions, like perfect spring snow every single day. And skiing in Sweden is really quite good. I always thought it was more of a cross-country destination, but there's some pretty good peaks to ski if you can be bothered to walk in. That's like a bit of a shot of what it looks like. And some of the skiing was so good, despite the fact the mountains are a bit smaller. They're more Scottish mountain size than sort of like the Alps. We would do this thing that like the North Americans call yo-yoing, where you ski down and then you're like, oh, that was so amazing, I'm just going to climb back up and ski it all over again. So on some days we would sort of like ski the peaks 2 or 3 times because they were so good. And what was really good about the terrain as well was that we had these lovely long sort of Cairngorm-esque valleys which we could journey through. So the journeying of the Pulk, it was like it was made for it. We could tow our Pulks pretty much effortlessly 90% of the time, but still get really good skiing on the peaks either side. There was a bit of route finding here and there along the way. So a few bits where we had to sort of like, you know, challenge ourselves and hope that we could get through some of the glaciers, because we couldn't find much information out online about people that had been through particular cols or even gone skiing there. So it was quite difficult to figure out whether we would be able to go the route that we thought we might. We saw a few animal tracks. This is a wolverine, and you might think that it looks really cuddly, but yeah, they're quite scary. I didn't take that photo. I found it online, but I was really pleased that we didn't meet one on the way, actually. And then towards the end of the trip, it had been really hot, actually, so much so that the highest mountain no longer became the highest mountain in Sweden, because the spring and the summer was so hot that the glacier shrunk by a couple of meters. But we turned the corner towards the end of the trip and saw this and suddenly thought, oh my goodness, we're going to run out of snow. And we were still about 40 kilometers away from the train station. And we thought, oh no, we're going to have to carry everything. Anyway, thankfully, we just had enough to get to the end. Had a few moments where we thought we might get a bit wet, which is always good fun when your skins get totally wet. The problem is that then if there's any dry snow around, they sort of stick and you end up dragging the whole mountain of snow as it sort of sticks like glue underneath your skis. So every evening I would lay my soaking wet skins across my belly in my sleeping bag to dry them out, which was really foul, but so worth it for the next day. And we finally made it to the end, made it to the train station, spent about an hour in the supermarket deciding what to eat. And then in the end, we settled on frozen beef burgers with lettuce and fruit because nothing else took our fancy, but it was so good, best beef burger ever. And I'll never forget, on the train ride back to the airport, we pretty much had our own carriage to ourselves, because what would happen is, because we were a bit smelly, because we'd been out for 2 weeks without washing, and someone would like open the door to our carriage, and they'd sit down, and then a couple of minutes later they'd promptly stand up and leave, and this would happen to everyone that entered our carriage, and it became like a bit of a joke, like how long are they going to last in the same carriage with us? So the final trip that I'm going to take you along on this evening is last year we went to the Lyngen, and this picture here is, I guess, what most people see the Lyngen as. It's steep, amazing skiable mountains, or a lot of steep skiing as well, and amazing fjords below. So it's that sort of ultimate Norway summit to sea skiing. But of course, we wanted to do it in a slightly different way. We thought, well, why don't we just see if we could traverse the whole of the peninsula rather than just like staying in a really nice expensive lodge or a nice hut. In fact, even the not very nice huts are blooming expensive over there. So we thought, well, we'll just camp and see if we can link up this amazing high level route across all the glaciers. So Lyngen is the sort of long bit on the screen with all the little stars on. So Tromsø, the star on the left-hand side, that's where we flew into. And you can see actually in the map on the left where we were in Sweden the previous year with those two bottom stars. So we were a little bit further north, and the mountains had changed from being really Cairngorms to suddenly being really, really Alpine-like. And about a week before we left, the avalanche forecast wasn't getting any better. And it was pretty bad, actually, for anyone that skis or knows about snow conditions. It was high, which is, it's sort of 4 out of 5. And basically, if you were to put it in terms of crossing a motorway, if you were going to cross the motorway and there was a high risk of you getting hit by a car, you probably wouldn't do it. And that was kind of what it was like in the mountains. Like if you were going to go in there and there was a high risk of you being avalanched, you probably wouldn't do it. So we suddenly had to change overnight our entire route from this amazing high level, really exciting route that we planned to, right, how can we avoid every single slope over 30 degrees, which is like a real challenge in a really steep area of the mountains. And we finally managed to figure out that there was this really cool route that we could do, sort of going up the east-hand side and then across the middle and then up the west-hand side. And it really all hung on the fact that we'd gone to the tourist office to find out about public transport. And we discovered that there was a ferry that took us from that most northerly star all the way across and back to Tromsø. And we were like, right, amazing. There's this ferry that goes on that day, which is our last day out there, at the perfect time. And of course, like everyone wants to explore the fjords of Norway because that's why you go there. So that was it. We were like, right, well, we're going to have to ski from the south to the ferry and have a full Norway experience. Something else that was really different about this trip to any other expedition I've done so far was that we had mobile phone reception nearly the whole way through. So I put this slide in there just to sort of jog my memory of that. And that it was really nice because you could speak to people and I could post photos on Instagram every day, like this is what we've done and this is where we've been and, you know, whatever we were doing. But it sort of felt a little bit weird as well. I'm not sure if I liked it, sort of opening up the tent and someone's like going, oh yeah, and how's the baby? And da 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 da. And like someone else is like, oh yeah, and how are you? And how's the dog? And I'm like, it's kind of, I don't know. I quite like just being on an expedition without all of that external stuff. But who knows? I don't know. It meant people at home could see the photos. That was cool. So the start of our trip, we had about 2 or 3 days of pretty much weather mostly like this. So I was really thankful that I just spent pretty much the whole winter in Scotland, like navigating in a whiteout almost every single day. And that was still a bit of a challenge because of course, then everyone else is like, oh yeah, well, you just spent like a month in Scotland. You know, actually, I think it was 3 months in Scotland. You can totally go out in front and do all the navigation. Aren't you preparing for your assessment? So I'm like, okay, well, I'll try not to fall off the ridge and send everyone into the river for like hours. But it worked, we were fine, and we didn't get avalanched, so happy days. And we did get in some skiing as well. We climbed a couple of peaks on the route, not as many as in Sweden, but that was, yeah, really, really nice, because the terrain was pretty steep, even though we were avoiding the steepest terrain Lyngen has to offer. You know, carrying the Pulks and all of our loads just took a lot longer than normal. Some of the skiing was really quite difficult with the Pulks as well. So that was really nice to get in some peaks without our Pulks. And the advantage of this peak was that we could see what we thought would be the route finding crux of the entire trip. And really the traverse of Lyngen for us depended on whether we could get through along that orange dotty line or not. And it looked like we could, but we weren't really too sure. Again, I couldn't find any information online about whether anyone had ever been through that. I'm sure people must have, because there's some pretty popular peaks around there. And in the end, we managed to sneak across like a massive old avalanche underneath all these seracs at the bottom of the glacier, this sort of like tumbling ice fall. Oh yeah, someone's recognized it's Del Tinden. That's the peak in the chat. Yeah, it's an amazing ski peak. Anyway, we managed to make it across through into the next valley, which was really cool and nice to make it through. And I guess like another really cool thing about going on ski expeditions to wild places is that you get some amazing campsites. You know, it's not every day you get to camp on the left-hand side, that picture, and you can see the fjord and the mountains, or on the right where you've got this whole mountain scenery just to yourselves and sort of the really long daylight hours of Norway. And just, yeah, it was fantastic, really, really lovely. Towards the end of the trip, one of the hardest things sometimes was finding places to cross rivers as everything was melting. And there was quite a lot of rain forecast at the end of the trip, even on the summits of the peaks. So that was always a little bit hair-raising, as we had to sort of think, well, I don't think we'll sink through there, and you know, we'll probably be okay. And we're giving it a bit of a probe and just checking it's going to be thick enough. And towards the end of the trip, because of the rain that was forecast, we sort of sacrificed this amazing route that would have taken us up this really long glacier and through and across to a bit, must have been another valley or two across towards the ferry, for 3 days of mostly this, sort of walking through birch woods and not that much good skiing, a few bits here and there, but on the whole it was a bit more like this for 3 days. However, finally the end was in sight, and if you follow the ridge down that those two guys have stood on there all the way across to the left-hand side, you'll see the land ends, and that's where the ferry was from. So it was really nice to get a really good ski peek in, which was from where we were stood here, all the way down to the ferry. And it felt really cool to have been there, having sort of survived the birch forests and all the steep skiing, and had some really good descents along the way. And before the worst of the rain was due to hit, you can see the clouds in this picture look quite grey in the distance, so it shut it down the following evening. I mean, and that evening, I mean, it was pretty horrific. In fact, we had 1 day to spare and we just spent it in the tents because none of us wants to go skiing in the torrential rain. And the Norwegian avalanche forecast are forecasting like slush flow avalanches, and none of us had ever heard of this before. And they were saying like they might reach 5 kilometers long at the bottom of the mountains, and we were all thinking, oh my goodness, well, I hope we're going to be safe camping like by the village. Anyway, we made it to the ferry. Of course, have to get a compulsory shot of us all beside the ferry, and it was raining at the time. But yeah, felt really cool to finally have made it across the Lyngen. And you'll notice we've all got what look like weird antennae on the back of us. So those are our Pulks, which caused much amusement as we tried to get into the ferry with our luggage, and then of course wandered across the whole of Tromsø carrying them. But yeah, it was good fun. So I've just got a little video that I'm going to play for you all, and then there's one more slide before we go for questions and answers. So it's a short video, about 2.5 minutes, and hopefully it will enable you to see what it's like in real life to do some of this stuff. Oh, hold on, malfunction. Let me go back.
can see you in the morning when you go to school. Don't forget your books, you know you gotta learn the golden rule. The teacher tells you stop your playing, get on with your work. And be like Johnny Too Good, don't you know he never shirks. He's coming along. After school is over, you're playing in the park. Don't be out too late, don't let it get too dark. They tell you not to hang around and learn what life's about. And grow up just like them, won't let you work it out. And you're full of doubt. You're coming around.
Super. So I've got lots of thanks to add as well. So the first person I'd like to thank is Dave Wynne-Jones. He's sort of been my unofficial ski mountaineering mentor. He probably doesn't know that I mention him at the end of every time I talk about skiing. But he essentially let me come on his first few expeditions that I went on and just taught me loads of stuff. So that's been great. And of course, Phil, he led the trip to Logan. David led and organised the trips to Scandinavia. So that was amazing, particularly as I'm not very good at organising anything myself. I've had so many teammates on multiple trips all over the place. So just thanks to all of them for joining me and teaching me things and having an amazing time. And then lots of organisations and ski clubs have given us grants over the years, despite the fact that we haven't necessarily been doing first ascents or even descents. So, you know, many thanks to the Eagle Ski Club, the Austrian Alpine Club, the UK section of that, and the Alpine Ski Club, because they've given us grants over the years, and that's been amazing. Of course, everyone loves a ski companion with a camera, because it means you get some photos of you too, and that's quite nice. And Google for the maps, very useful for looking at Google Earth as well. And then, of course, you know, lots of gear manufacturers have been really kind in giving me discounts and donations over the years. And that's just amazing, particularly when, you know, you agree to do a trip like going to Logan, you realise you need to get some really expensive neoprene overboots so you don't get frostbite. So you're like, well, I'm definitely going to pay for those, even though they come all the way from America. And then like someone else is like, oh, well, we'll give you a pro discount for that if you like. And you haven't even asked for it. And you're just, that is just amazing. So thank you so much. And then, of course, you know, all my friends, family, colleagues, employers basically have to put up with me all year round, just talking about like how I'm going to train for the next ski trip, where I'm going to go, what kit I might need, like, can I take the whole of spring off again for like the 10th year in a row, please, because I want to do this really amazing thing. And I just talk about it the whole time. So thank you to all of them for being really long suffering. And then, of course, Supertramp make good music. So that was the music you might have been listening to in the video there. So thank you very much all for listening.
Thanks, Iona, that was fab. Really great inspiration there, and yeah, really, you know, amazing journeys. And gosh, what a journey you've been on since like that question when you were small in the Royal Geographic saying, where do I do this? Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for all the work you put in this week. as well, preparing for this. So we really appreciate it. So now we're going over to questions and answers with Iona. So what you can do, if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can write in the comments there and we'll pick them up and ask Iona. Or if you'd like to write them in the chat here, then that's cool, we'll pick them up. Or if you'd like to ask them in person, what you need to do is at the bottom bar, there's a button that says participants. If you click that, and then there's a little option to raise your hand, and then that will flag up, and then we can come to you and unmute your mic to ask Iona a question. So if anyone's got a question, if you want to raise your hand digitally, or write it in the chat, then that's great. Thanks very much. Start off, I've had a question from someone watching on Facebook who wants to know, apart from like all the normal kit that you showed in your slide when you go on a ski tour expedition, what top item do you take with you? Is it even a bit of luxury or a bit of kind of keeping yourself sane? And Lucy, who wrote the question, said she likes to take a little tub of moisturizer with her. So is there anything like that you'd say?
So I do have a thing for chocolates. I think on the last trip I might have taken 2 kilos of Galaxy chocolate with me so that I could have an entire line a day, because there's nothing worse than having to break the line and then you can only eat half of it. So that's like one of my luxuries. But I think for me, I've actually brought it here because I thought Kit might come into it. My favourite item are my new, well, actually they're quite battered now. They're like 4 years old, but relatively new because I had my old ski boots for a long time. My new-ish ski boots, and that was such a sort of like trauma for me to get a new pair, because once you get your first pair and you love them, you're like, oh my goodness, nothing's ever gonna come close. So in terms of essential kits, oh yeah, I love these ski boots. So that would be my essential thing in addition to the chocolate luxury.
Excellent. One of the things you talked about was training for a trip, and how do you simulate that, pulling a Pulk for training? Because how much weight do you have in that? How do you kind of train for that as well?
So that's a good question as well. So I don't actually pull anything behind me for training, mostly because I just don't think I can like deal with pulling tires down the local track. That's not for me. I know lots of people do that for polar expeditions, but one of the big things I do is I just try and get in lots of vertical mileage, so just going up lots and lots of hills. And quite regularly what I'll do is, so like Agarn is a really good hill here because it's quite a consistent gradient and it's quite steep, and it's mostly steps the whole way up, so it's a really good workout. And there's also a lake at the bottom, which means that you can fill up loads of water bottles with water, put them in your rucksack, and then you can just go from the bottom to top as fast as you can, and then empty out all the water and then come back down with a really light pack. So that's one of the things that I find really useful for just getting used to carrying a rucksack and training without impacting your knees too much. Yeah.
That's good, good ideas.
And core strength like is so good. Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. I had a question from Emma on the chat, and she wants to know, did you make your own Pulk to fit you? Where do you get them from? Oh
yeah, that's a good question. So I didn't actually it's not technically my Pulk. I share it with a friend. So every year we were like, do you want the Pulk this year or do I want it? I think actually we're going to have to like just get one each now. So my friend David, who lives up in Snowdonia, he is like just amazing at making things. So he used to be a cabinetry maker. I'm not sure what the official term is. Anyway, so he can pretty much make, build, fix anything. So he's really useful at sorting breaks on expedition, as well as just being an amazing guy. But he made the Pulks for us. So originally we ordered in the Pulk itself from somewhere. It's got a particular name. I can't remember what the brand name is. And then he just bought all the plumbing pipe. And one of the things we found was that you have to measure the pipe for yourself, because if it's too short, then the Pulk runs over the back of your skis. And if it's too long, it's quite hard to control. So it took a couple of expeditions and trial and error. I took it out on the nursery slope in Verbier once, which caused much confusion, but just to test it out. Yeah, haul bags are much simpler because all you need is like a really big dry bag that's quite durable and one piece of plumbing pipe with a little swivel so that it doesn't all tangle up. And that's a really good way of making a simple towing thing. Yeah.
Thank you. Hannah on the chat wants to know, did you find that your feet swelled up at altitude like on Mount Logan? So do you need bigger ski boots for that kind of trip?
So I didn't have any problems with my feet. I did find that on Mount Logan, I got really hot feet on some of the days. So on some of my first trips, I wore vapor barrier liner socks, which essentially means that the sweat can't leave your sock and go into your ski boots. Sounds a bit weird, but you don't want your ski boot to absorb lots of moisture because it can be quite hard to dry out. And I found that my feet were getting really, really hot. So I took them off, but that was the only foot problem I've ever had, actually, touch wood. But I size up my ski touring boots, maybe half a size bigger than my piste boots. I've got a lot of wiggle room in them. Maybe the difference if you're a rock climber between like your rock climbing shoes that you would wear for like that tiny technical, really hard route, and then the ones that you can wear your woolly socks in, like in the winter, sort of like that. Yeah.
Yeah, great tips there. That's great. Thank you. And how about, have you got any advice for someone who wants to get into ski touring? So how would you develop your kind of snow reading skills? How, where could you base yourself to learn to ski tour? Where would you recommend to kind of go for that?
So, I mean, I think one of the most difficult things is that there's a lot of stuff to learn. So I think what's really important is trying to go with people who already know what they're talking about. So if you can go with a guide and join like an introductory ski touring week, and ideally a week, because you just have time to let yourself learn stuff rather than just a weekend where it's sort of like it's over and it's like, oh, okay. Then that's really, really good. And going with a guide who's specifically going to teach you stuff. So there's quite a few companies, and I think you guys sometimes do trips as well, that will teach you stuff about ski touring. But if not, then, so one of my first ski tours was with a ski instructor who knew quite a lot of stuff and was qualified in that as well. And some of my sort of friends who I've made since I've started ski touring, they know as much, as anyone qualified would as well. So joining the Eagle Ski Club could be an option, or joining another club that does lots of ski touring, because, if you, depending upon which tour you join, there are often quite a lot of beginner tours, so there are actually quite a lot of experienced people in there. So that's quite a good starting point. And getting a couple of books of Booksier thing and having a little read of those. And it's so much to learn. I learn more stuff every single year about snow science and all sorts of stuff. So you just, the more you learn, the more you realise you don't know much.
Yeah, I think so Off-Piste Performance do a really good kind of mountaineer to skier, or off-piste skier ski tourer course, don't they? I think that's a really good one. And then I love Bruce Goodlad and his books. So
if you're going to do like an avalanche course, I thoroughly recommend him with the Avalanche Geeks. We did one with work a couple of years ago and it was amazing. So I totally recommend that. And he's really good at teaching as well. So it's not just like someone that knows about snow but can't teach you. He's really, really good.
Definitely. Yeah, I think you're right. There's so many elements, aren't there? And sometimes it's quite hard to know where to begin. And when you look at kind of introductory ski weeks, a lot of them kind of say, oh, you have to be able to confidently ski a red or things. So there are little kind of pointers about what level your skiing needs to be before you can kind of do things like that. But what's your where are you going to go next? What's the plan?
I don't know. I've got so many dots on my Google Earth. So like I really want to do some more big traverses in North America. I'd love to go to the Brooks Range, which is like miles up in the north of Alaska. But that might take a while to plan because they don't actually get that much snow and it's sort of a lot of research will be needed. but I also really want to go back to Scandinavia, and it's quite nice to be somewhere so close to home but so wild as well. So I'm sort of keen to go back there. We were supposed to go back to do a traverse from east in Sweden to Narvik in Norway about a month ago, but of course, yeah, we haven't gone. But maybe we'll try next year.
Great. Yeah, loads of plans then. I think there's just so much, and when you start getting into ski touring, I think there's so many options, aren't there? So
yeah.
Yeah.
Anywhere it snows is game, really. You know, like if there's snow, then you can ski. Yeah.
So that in the video when you were going through the like through the heather and stuff, I was just like, oh my god, that's so Scottish. Like,
yeah. It's really quite easy to walk through the heather and tow a Pulk. I was really surprised. It's actually, I'm thinking maybe I could do it in Scotland.
Raise some eyebrows if you're heading out of the Cairngorm ski station. I'm like, hello, it's got the Pulk. Excellent. Thank you. Oh, hang on, we've got a question from over here. Oh, do you have any tips for not falling over whilst traversing in a whiteout? Says, I'm an intermediate but can't seem to get any better at not falling uphill when visibility is bad. Yeah.
So I guess, so sometimes what I do is I almost like drag my poles along the ground. So, you know, like I shouldn't really say that as a ski instructor, really, because it's not a very good technique, but it can help you just feel whether you're moving or not, because sometimes you feel really seasick and you can't even tell if you've stopped or whether you're still moving. So that can really help. And also, like everyone says, bend the knees, but actually sinking your center of gravity a little bit lower can just help you absorb some of the bumps a bit more and being a bit more actively tensioned with your thighs and your glutes and your core. That sounds really weird, but try it next time you go skiing. It does work. It works really well in like when you're going over bumpy terrain and it's foggy as well. So maybe go to like, don't go to a mogul field in the fog, but maybe like a bumpy piste. Give it a go. Don't sue me if you fall over though.
Thank you so much. Cool. I think we'll probably leave it there. I think we've answered everyone's questions, so thank you very much for writing in with those. Thanks, Iona, for taking the time to answer them. What we're saying is for everyone that if you think of any questions afterwards or you didn't want to ask them now, if you send them in to us, then we can always ask Iona and then we'll put the answers on the website. So like you said at the beginning, all of the past talks are on our website with a little blog about it, and you can find out more about the speakers, and Iona's will be up there as well shortly. So if anyone's missed it or you want to watch it again, you can have a look at that as well. So I always forget this slide. Thank you. So up next, so for the next 2 weeks we've actually got 2 more Plaza Brennan instructors. Kath James, who's going to be talking about developing your alpine climbing career. So all the things that she wished she would have known starting out, and where you can develop your skills and building up to some more trickier climbs. So that would be brilliant if you're kind of looking to develop your own mountaineering. Next, after that, we've got Helen Teasdale, who's going to be talking about alpine adventures with children. So her top tips of how you can include your little ones when you go along, and her stories of doing that with her son. And then we're kind of changing tack completely the week after. So we've got Katie Keeley, who's one of our members, has bravely stepped up and is going to talk about her really exciting trip to the Wadi Rum in the Middle East and the kind of desert climbing that's going on there. So we're kind of leaving the mountains for a week, but it's going to be great to hear from Katie. So I can't remember what's next. Is this when I say back to you, Lizzie? Back to you, Lizzie.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And again, thanks so much, Iona. Fantastic. I've really enjoyed it. I've shared that already. But if you guys like what you've seen, and you want to hear more, I know a lot of you on here are members already, but for those of you who aren't, definitely find us on Facebook, find us on Instagram, check out the website. As Louise and Jenny have already said, loads of great content up there, and we're putting more up every day. So get in touch with us there and sign up to the newsletter, and you'll stay up to date. Once we're able to do meets again, we do a summer meet and a winter meet, and we've started to do UK skills meets, which are postponed for the moment, but we'll be starting them up soon. The other thing that we have is Iona's contact details. So if you want to hang out with her and want to hire her as a guide, want to ask her some more questions directly, feel free to get in touch with her through her email address, follow her on Instagram. And again, thank you guys so much for joining today. We hope that you're all healthy and happy and doing well, and really, really grateful for you to join us, and hope to see you again next week. Bye, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
That was fantastic.